I'm Shayla Harris, here with Tyler Kissinger, who's running for president under the United Progress Slate. I was wondering if you could tell us about some of your prior experience and why you think it qualifies you for this position.
Yeah, so as I think a lot of folks know, I'm the current SG president. I served as community and government liaison the previous year, which actually Kenzo, who's one of my running mates, he's the current community and government liaison. And I think over the past year, all three of us, Kenzo and Alex and I, have really worked on building out SG into a body that is active, that's productive, and that is doing concrete things to improve student life for students at the University of Chicago. I think in a lot of ways, we've been working on bringing the organization from 0 to 60. I think before last year, people didn't really know that we existed. If they did, the only way they really interfaced with us was through getting RSO funding. But on everything from UPass to getting the university to do the 2 campus climate surveys that they've initiated, to just basic things like registering students to vote and expanding the airport shuttle program. I think we've really expanded our presence on campus and made students more aware that not only we exist, but we're also a place where they can come and actually do things, which has been nice.
So what have you learned from holding this position, and maybe what is one of your biggest accomplishments?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is how to, and this is maybe a little boring, but how complicated and difficult, but necessarily difficult it is to make really substantive change at an institution like the University of Chicago. We live in like a very divisional and segmented off university when taken as a whole, but particularly between like the college and graduate divisions. And so anytime you want to do any sort of big writ large policy change, whether it's the sexual assault policy or UPass, you really have to kind of go through 11 different processes in working with different area deans and different administrators to see that through. And it's like annoying and complicated and difficult, but it's an absolutely like necessary and critical part of the process. And so it's important first to have relationships with all of those people, and good ones, so that you can actually work with them productively. And to take the time to like build up those relationships and bring all of the relevant stakeholders to the table. And so I think learning how to do that and do it well has been one of the biggest things I've taken away, and that I think as an organization we've learned how to do better over the past year, because I think it's necessary for us to be doing anything at this university. And so I guess to respond to your second part, I think the campus climate surveys are probably one of the bigger accomplishments of not just us, but of students and faculty and staff who've been pushing for them for years at the university. We started talking with President Zimmer last spring about the need for it, and so I started talking to the provost about it. And again, it's one of these complicated issues where you have to bring all these relevant stakeholders to the table. But we did it, and so now the university is doing the sexual assault and sexual misconduct survey that we're in the middle of right now. Don't forget to do it, it's really important. I think by Monday night at midnight. And then also the diversity and inclusion one, which is going to be coming out in the fall. I think they are really big. I think they are big opportunities for us to have a substantive change for students' experience on campus on issues from sexual assault to better supporting students of color and first-generation college students. And so I think that's the most exciting thing that we've done.
So what kind of have you learned about strategies to kind of maintain good relationships with the many working parts that you were talking about?
I think knowing when to push and when to compliment and respect efforts by admin, because we're not always going to agree. We fundamentally represent, as student government and as administrators, we have different we represent different stakeholders, and we have different visions and values and ideas of how the university should operate. And so I guess one good example of that is we worked a lot on UCBD transparency this year. In the fall, we were working on reappointing 3 members to the Independent Review Committee of the UCPP. So they're the committee that reviews all the complaints against UCPP. This committee is made up of students, faculty, staff, and community members. And our 3 appointees, all of whom had served on the board the previous year, were rejected by folks in campus and student life. We were told that students couldn't serve more than 1 term on that, even though we had never been told that rule before. We don't think it really existed, and there have been students who had served more than 1 term before. And so we pushed a lot. And we actually ultimately weren't successful in getting the students that we wanted to serve on the board. But we still came back to the table, and so when it came time to be talking about how we can actually improve UCD transparency through the disclosure of information, we worked with Chief Lynch, we worked with other administrators from Derek Douglas and the Office of Civic Engagement to Michelle Rasmussen and Campus and Student Life to work on getting the university to do what they ultimately did, which is release contact cards and traffic stop logs, which has been a huge win for students on campus, and I think can do a lot to work toward ending racial profiling and having a more transparent police force that everyone in the community feels safe around.
What are some of the main points of your platform?
So I think a lot of it is building off of the progress that we've made this year. We have a pretty particular vision that we think is shared by a lot of students at this university of student government that is strong and a centralized advocate for graduate and undergraduate students. I think one thing that gets lost a lot is that student government actually represents graduate students too. And there are double the number of graduate students on this campus than there are undergraduates. And so we spend a lot of time working on graduate student issues this year, from advocating for them to improve the child care stipend for student parents, to making sure graduate students are included in the campus climate survey, and working on supporting groups like the Graduate Students United's campaign to reduce the student life fee for graduate students, since they pay a lot in but don't see the same in terms of benefits out as undergraduates do. And so I think really bringing everyone to the table, really everyone, including graduate students, is a big part of our vision for student government and a big part of our platform. And I think more broadly it's continuing the successes and building up the successes that we've had, whether it's seen through the campus climate surveys or seen through UPass, which is going to be implemented for the college in fall 2016. We're continuing to work with graduate schools and divisions on implementation for them. And also continuing to build up student government into a centralized place that can have influence on a whole host of issues, from housing and dining to academics in the college, where actually there's very little centralized leadership or very little formalized space for students to have input on how the core operates. And so building up a structure, like a committee structure, that's issue-oriented, that's productive, that results in institutional memory and actually concrete things being done by the whole membership of student government is a big part of our vision.
Okay, you talked a lot about continuing what you've already done, but are there any new ideas that you want to implement if you were elected? Yeah,
I think there are a lot of really exciting ideas out there right now about improving the RSO funding process. RSOs have this kind of silly cap where SGFC will only pay for up to 50% of travel costs. Mm-hmm. It's ultimately pretty arbitrary. SGFC has the money and could be funding trips more fully. We also want to reduce the amount that RSOs have to rely on fundraisers, especially small RSOs. Ultimately, it's a waste of time. We don't want to have students sitting out in front of Cobb for 3 hours trying to selling cookies and maybe making $20 or maybe coming at a loss, when ultimately the amount of money that they theoretically could be earning from that fundraiser could have just been covered from SGFC in the first place. So we want to do a lot of substantive things on that. Like I said, we want to be building out this structure, like a formal committee structure, so that we can have more influence on issues like housing, which is really relevant right now, and dining issues, and academics in the college, and being kind of the big three that I think there's lacking leadership on. And really working with college council in all of this, because college council is a 16-member body made up of representatives from all the class years in the college. And I think a lot of the times when you look at what SG does substantively and concretely, most of that's not coming out of the college council, and I think that's not to our benefit. They're a huge resource, but because they're not given the tools or the relationships or the guidance on how to be doing substantive concrete work, it doesn't get done. And I think we could quadruple our capacity as an organization to be having an influence on this campus by working better with the college council. Mm-hmm.
You talked about formal committee structure. What would that look like if it was up to you?
So I think it's taking a page out of the book of how a lot of other organizations across the country operate. This year, actually, we co-founded an organization called the Coalition of Chicago Colleges and Universities. And what it is it's sort of a meta student government made up of all the Chicago area colleges and universities, from Northwestern to Loyola, DePaul, UIC, Chicago State. And the way that most of their organizations are structured, especially organizations that institutions like Duke are structured is that they have formal committees that their representatives can sit on, and that also students at large can sit on, that have a chair that meets regularly outside of this like one time a week where everyone comes together and meets, and is constantly doing research and constantly churning out reports about their issue area and developing relationships with administrators who have influence over their issue area. And it's important because the work lives on beyond just the year that it gets done by the people who are currently in it. Theoretically, the model is something like you sit on a committee one year, then maybe the next year you become a chair, and maybe the next year you move up to another position. And so it creates this system of internal memory and continuity that what happens most years is because you have a cohort coming in and cohort leaving every year, we lose that. We lose all of that memory and people reinvent the wheel every year. But if student government is ever to be truly like an actually impactful and useful body on campus, it has to have internal memory and it has to have relationships with administrators that take it seriously and that respect it. And that's what a lot of other organizations like Northwestern do really well, and I think we would do well to learn from their example.
But with this internal memory, how would you make sure that new voices are being heard?
So I think that involves drawing on members outside of student government, which I think would be part of the committee. You would have people would apply and be selected based on their interest and previous commitment to that issue area, and be voted in by the council. And so I think you would be drawing on a lot of fresh blood. And I think the other key part of that is also communication, because we're not going to be involving new voices unless people don't know about us and aren't extremely aware of the work we're doing. And so I think, again, that's building up the progress we've made from building up the newsletter this year, which didn't exist before, which now has like 1,500 subscribers, and continuing our success on like social media, where we like doubled the number of likes that we have. We just have way more connections, and so advertising these opportunities to get involved in a centralized way, I think also gives new voices the chance to come to the table that they don't really have right now.
Can you tell us your stance on the recent proposal to stipend RSO leaders?
Yeah, well, I came out with the proposal, so I support it. I think in the fall, we rolled out what I think, frankly, was a half-baked proposal. We heard a lot of student concern about it, and we took it seriously. And so that's why we chose not to move forward with stipends. No one received a stipend this academic year at all. And we worked a lot with both members of College Council, but especially folks in campus and student life and the Office of College Aid in constructing a proposal that I think was true to what we were attempting to do the first go around, but I think is way better. So I'm really excited about the opportunity. Broadly to summarize it, is that people involved in RSO leadership positions can have the ability to apply to a fund which would provide them with a small stipend to support their work in leading the student organization. A lot of people, myself included frankly, are self-supporting college students. They have to be working a job outside of class in order to support themselves at the university, and a lot of the times that comes at the expense of either their work in RSOs or their coursework or both. And this would give the chance for all students in Chicago to be deeply involved in RSO leadership. And I think it levels the playing field a little bit. And we're really excited about it. And I think it's been widely supported by folks in the College Council. It's definitely widely supported by folks in College Aid. I'm really excited about the proposal.
So what kind of oversight would there be to determine who qualifies for receiving this money?
So it kind of goes through two separate processes. The first is there'll be a student committee that's made up of members of SG and members in the student body at large, that's overseen by a staff member from the Center for Leadership and Involvement. That'll go through all of the applications without any identifying personal information, especially financial status, and go through and sort of generate a roughly like ranked list on who they think should be receiving the stipends. That list would then go to the Office of College Aid, who will pull from it based on financial need, guaranteeing for the first half of awards that they definitely go to people who are on financial aid and have financial need, and then they'll go back through the list and then pull kind of need blind. And what that accomplishes is two things. One, it means that by receiving a stipend, you're not automatically tagged as someone who's on financial aid, so it preserves people's privacy a little bit more. but it is also still targeted at people who have a formal financial need. But it also recognizes that not only people who are on financial aid are self-supporting. There are people who are not on financial aid who also still are self-supporting and who still also need to be supporting a job, or to be having a job and having some sort of income. And it gives a little bit of flexibility for those folks. And so we think it's a pretty fair and robust process.
Okay. So going back to RSOs, what would you do to kind of help new RSOs that are still getting off of the ground while still managing to help allocate money to larger RSOs that have been established for quite some time?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think it goes back to a couple of the things that I mentioned earlier on being more supportive in funding allocations, not just being willing to sort of waive the requirement for people to fundraise, because ultimately that's just taking away from their time to be doing great work in their RSO. And I think also continuing to just direct as much money as possible to funding student organizations so that there are as many funding opportunities as possible.
Would the stipend to RSO leaders at all affect the amount of money that's allocated to RSOs?
No, it wouldn't.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Best of luck.